Hopeless man meets a stray dog. But what? This dog does changes everything. The wind cut through the narrow underpass like a blade, and the rain fell in a steady, cold sheet, drenching the concrete walls until they glistened. Raymond huddled deeper into the shadows. Beneath the bridge, the threadbare sleeves of his jacket offering little defense against the biting chill. He sat on a flattened piece of cardboard, his back pressed to a damp pillar, knees drawn up, arms wrapped tight across his chest. He had once been a man of strength, hands calloused from years of carpentry, shoulders square from lifting lumber and building homes that others now lived in. But that life had burned away quite literally when his workshop went up in flames just 6 months after his wife died. The insurance had failed to cover the loss. The grief had closed in like fog, and, one by one, things fell apart until all that remained was this: a cardboard mat, a sandwich saved from a shelter's lunch handout, and the sound of cars sloshing above him on the wet highway. He was about to take the first bite when a movement caught his eye, something just beyond the edge of the concrete barrier. Raymond leaned forward cautiously and squinted into the dark. There, curled into himself near a puddle, was a dog, a large German shepherd, soaked to the skin, ribs showing faintly beneath the fur, eyes glinting with both fear and fatigue. Its ears twitched at the sound of Raymond shifting, but it did not run. It barely moved. "Well, look at you," Raymond murmured, more to himself than to the dog. "A fellow wanderer, huh?" The dog just looked at him, silent, unmoving. Raymond stared down at his sandwich, white bread, bologna, and mustard, and sighed. "Guess there's enough for two." He tore the sandwich clean down the middle, crawled forward on his knees, and laid half of it on the ground a few feet away from the dog. Then he backed away slowly and returned to his corner. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the dog crept forward, cautious but hungry. It sniffed the offering and devoured it in 2 swift bites. Raymond watched quietly. "Good. No sense starving to death, even if we're freezing," he said, pulling off his jacket. The cold hit his arms like a slap, but he crawled over to the dog again, holding the coat open. "Come on, buddy. This thing's seen better days. But so have we." The dog did not flinch when Raymond gently draped the jacket over its back, tucking the corners beneath its belly. It stood still for a moment, then lowered itself to the ground and curled into a tight ball beneath the fabric. Raymond eased himself down beside the dog and leaned back against the concrete. The rain tapped steadily above, and the cars hissed along the road. He could feel the dog's breathing, now slow and rhythmic, like a quiet heartbeat. He let out a laugh, soft, dry, and full of the kind of bitterness only time could carve. "You know what, pal? If I win the lottery tomorrow, you and me, steak and real plates, all right." The dog gave a low, almost inaudible whine, and shifted closer, resting its head against Raymond's thigh. He blinked at the ceiling of the bridge, then closed his eyes. 2 lost things, sharing the same dark shelter from the world. The next morning broke with a thin gray light stretching across the cracked sidewalks. The rain had stopped, but the air remained damp and cold. Raymond sat up slowly beneath the bridge, joints aching, and glanced down at the bundle of fur still curled beneath his old jacket. The dog lifted its head, eyes meeting his in a calm, silent gaze. Still with me, huh? Raymond muttered, reaching out to scratch behind one ear. The dog leaned into his touch. They set off together not long after sunrise. Raymond did not know where they were headed exactly. Maybe the bakery, dumpster, maybe the back alley behind the church, but he figured any place with scraps was better than sitting still. The dog stayed close to his side, steps light, alert, but trusting. By the time they reached the small commercial strip near the bus station, Raymond's stomach was already growling. He passed a coffee shop, nodded politely to a woman unlocking the door, and then spotted the corner newsstand. A young boy stood there in a red hoodie, surrounded by a cardboard box filled with lottery tickets. Raymond barely gave it a glance until the dog suddenly pulled hard on the rope he tied to an old belt loop. "Hey, whoa," Raymond said, stumbling forward as the dog let out a loud, sudden bark. The boy looked over, startled. The dog barked again, then sat back on its hunches and stared up at Raymond as if waiting for him to understand something obvious. Raymond blinked, then chuckled under his breath. "You remembered that, huh?" he said. "Steak and real plates, right?" He reached into the pocket of his jeans and dug around. His fingers brushed against something folded and worn. Two $1 bills slightly damp from the night. He looked at the dog who still had not broken eye contact. "All right," he said with a slow nod. "Let's be fools together." He stepped up to the boy. "Just one scratch off, please. Whatever your luckiest one is." The kid grinned and handed him a ticket. Raymond walked over to the awning of the small convenience store next door and crouched down under the shade. He pulled a coin from his other pocket, an old quarter he kept for emergencies, and scratched the silvery surface with tired fingers. He stared, then stared harder. The numbers aligned, the symbols matched. He looked again, heart beginning to pound. The winning code shimmered in the morning light. $250,000. 0. For several seconds, Raymond did not move. The street noise faded into silence. His breath caught. He looked up at the dog, still sitting there, tail swaying gently. He stammered, then laughed, the sound rough and real. "You're kidding. You have to be kidding." The dog barked once, sharp and joyful, then bounded toward him. Raymond stood, swept the dog into his arms, and spun in a full circle, laughing like he had not in years. The dog's tongue licked his chin, his cheek, his nose, tail whipping through the air. Pedestrians paused. Someone clapped. A man at the coffee shop smiled behind the counter. Raymond set the dog down, knelt to its level, and cupped its face in his hands. "We did it, pal. You and me." The dog barked again, tail wagging furiously. Raymond looked up at the sky, gray and soft with morning light, and whispered, "Maybe some promises do come true after all." The clerk at the lottery office handed Raymond the check with a rehearsed smile, but Raymond barely registered the weight of it. The sum, printed in bold, $250,000, should have made his knees buckle. Instead, all he could think about was the dog wagging his tail outside the glass doors, waiting faithfully, just like he had the night before under the rain beneath the bridge. Raymond stepped outside, folded the check carefully into his coat, and crouched to the dog's level. "You hungry, Lucky?" It was the first time he had said the name out loud, but it fit The dog barked softly, and Raymond smiled. Come on, let's make good on that promise. 10 minutes later, they sat at a small sidewalk diner on the corner of Maple and Eastston. It was nothing fancy, just chrome chairs, red plastic tablecloths, and a faded umbrella flapping gently overhead, but it was open, warm, and smelled like heaven. Raymond had passed it 100 times before, but never dared to go in. Now he held the door open like a king inviting a guest. Lucky trotted in beside him, fur still a bit patchy, but eyes bright and tail alert. They chose a table by the window. The waitress approached with a raised brow, clearly noting Lucky, sitting upright in the seat across from Raymond. He eats with me, Raymond said simply, voice kind but steady. Real plates just like I promised. She blinked, then smiled. You got it. He ordered 2 steak dinners, medium rare with mashed potatoes, grilled vegetables, and an extra side of bacon. When the plates came, Lee's tail thumped wildly against the seat. His food was placed neatly in front of him, just like any other guest. A bowl of cold water in a ceramic dish was set beside the plate, not on the floor, but right on the table. Raymond picked up his fork and knife, cut into the first piece of steak, then offered a slice to Lucky. We made it, buddy. Thick and real plates like I promised. Lucky took the bite gently, then licked his chops, eyes wide with disbelief and joy. People around the diner began to notice. Phones were lifted, cameras clicked. Teenagers started recording a short video. A woman near the register whispered, "That's the man from the scratch-off ticket. He's feeding his dog. Like family." Raymond just laughed and kept cutting steak, sharing every bite, feeding Lucky from the same plate he ate from. It was not about extravagance. It was about honor, gratitude, and a moment that felt more fulfilling than any luxury. The entire diner clapped when Lucky polished off the last bite and licked his empty plate with pride. Raymond raised his water glass in a toast to Lucky Breaks and loyal friends. After the meal, he took Lucky straight to a veterinary clinic. The dog was cleaned, vaccinated, and examined with care. Raymond watched from the corner, hand clenched on the chair, eyes never leaving Lucky. Seems like someone's had a rough go, the veterinarian said gently, inspecting the scars and worn pads. But he's strong. You gave him a fighting chance. They gave Lucky a soft blue collar with a tag that simply read, "Lucky if found, return to Raymond." That night, Raymond did not return to the underpass. He checked into a modest motel just 2 blocks from where he had spent the last 6 months, sleeping on concrete. As Lucky curled up at the foot of the clean bed, wrapped in a towel and still drowsy from the bath, Raymond sat on the edge of the mattress and stared at the ceiling. "This money," he whispered, "is not just mine. Came from Hope and from him." And as Lee's gentle breathing filled the room, Raymond realized the truth of it. This was not just a win, it was a new beginning for both of them. Raymond stood in front of the rusted metal gate, the sun casting long shadows across the abandoned animal shelter. The place had once been lively, but now the roof sagged, the fence leaned, and a handwritten closing soon sign flapped weakly in the wind. Inside, a handful of dogs still barked softly, waiting for something or someone to change their fate. He reached into his coat pocket, and pulled out a folded check. It was not all he had left, but it was enough. 3 weeks had passed since the lottery. Win and Raymond had spent every day since thinking not about what he could own but about what he could rebuild. This shelter would be the first. The owner, an older woman with weary eyes and a cracked voice, cried when he offered to cover all operating costs for the next 2 years. She cried harder when he told her he wanted the name changed. "Call it Lee's Place," he said, placing a gentle hand on Lee's head. "He's the reason I'm standing here." The story spread quickly. A former homeless man saves an animal shelter with his lottery winning. The local news picked it up. One reporter titled the article, "From the Streets to a Sanctuary: How One Dog Saved a Man Who Saved Many More." But Raymond did not stop there. He bought a crumbling garage just off River Street, a space that had not seen use in a decade. With a little renovation and a lot of effort, he turned it into something new. A workshop where people like him, those who had lost everything, could come and learn carpentry, build furniture, and build dignity again. The place had no formal name, just a carved wooden sign that read, "Welcome back." Every day, Lucky was there, sitting on a cushion by the door, wagging his tail as each person arrived. He became part mascot, part guardian, part silent therapist. People talked to him more than they talked to each other in the beginning, and that was perfectly fine. Healing came in strange ways. And still, Raymond was not finished. With help from the community, he started a small outreach fund called From the Streets to Hope. Every Saturday morning, he and a few volunteers packed meals, real meals, and delivered them to people living on the streets who had pets. He brought pet food, collars, treats, blankets, and even toys. He never judged. He just offered a warm smile and a steady presence. Lucky went on every route. People lit up when they saw him. Children hugged him. Veterans saluted him. One man whispered, "He looks just like the dog I lost in Iraq." Lucky licked his hand gently and sat beside him for 10 quiet minutes. As the months passed, Raymond refused to move into a big house or buy a flashy car. He rented a modest apartment above a bakery and lived simply. He ate toast with peanut butter in the mornings, read old books at night, and walked Lucky through the park every evening. He had once been a man drowning in grief and silence. Now, he was part of something again, part of laughter, of labor, of life. One evening, sitting outside the workshop, watching the sun dip below the rooftops, Raymond looked at Lucky, who lay beside him with paws stretched and eyes half closed. "I lost everything once," he murmured, "and then I met you." Lucky opened one eye, then nudged his hands softly. Together, they had turned a broken story into a beginning. Together, they had become the kind of miracle the world still believed in. A gentle breeze swept across the city park as late spring sunlight filtered through the tall oaks, their branches swaying gently, like an old lullaby. The grass shimmered with the last golden hues of the afternoon, and dandelions drifted lazily in the air. Children played in the distance, their laughter ringing like wind chimes through the warm air, blending with the soft barks of dogs, and the hum of life slowly unfolding around them. Near the edge of the grass, just off the winding walking path, a modest crowd had gathered, folding chairs lined up in neat rows. A small podium stood in front of them, and, behind it all, nestled into the shade of a great oak, sat a long wooden bench, newly installed beside a smooth granite marker. There were no balloons or decorations, just quiet reverence and warmth in the eyes of the people who came to witness something gentle, something real. Raymond stood beside the bench, wearing a second-hand suit that fit just well enough. He had borrowed it from a church volunteer, pressed it himself, and straightened the cuffs that morning with more care than he had shown himself in years. His hair was longer than it used to be, stray with more silver now, and his shoulders were no longer hunched. He held a leash in one hand, though the dog it belonged to sat patiently by his side, unmoving, confident, and calm. Lucky! The German shepherd's ears twitched as applause rippled through the small crowd. Volunteers from the animal shelter clapped warmly. Community members, a few local news reporters, and more than a few familiar faces from the streets, all had come for the same reason. They had not come to witness fame or wealth. They had come to celebrate a bond that had restored not just one life, but many. Today, Lucky was being named Companion of the Year by the State Rescue Network, not just for surviving, not just for being adopted, but for being something bigger, for being the heartbeat behind a wave of change that started under a bridge and reached into every corner of the neighborhood. The director of the rescue organization stepped up and spoke a few heartfelt words, then handed Raymond a certificate framed in glass and a small brass medal with a paw print engraved on the face. Raymond knelt and clipped the medal onto Lee's collar, fingers steady despite the ache in his throat. "You earned this," he whispered. Then he stood, walked to the podium, and paused beside the bench. His hand brushed across the words carved into the wood. "To the dog who reminded me I still mattered." He faced the crowd. His voice was low, but every word carried. "There was a time I thought I had nothing left, no one left. But this dog, he saw me when I could not see myself. He waited beside me when the world had passed me by, and somehow he led me out. There were no dramatic pauses, no rehearsed phrases, just truth spoken plainly. He did not just save me," Raymond continued. "He reminded me of what it meant to be seen, to matter. And every life we touched after that, it started with him." People wiped their eyes. A man in the back clapped once, then another, and soon the park filled with a soft wave of applause, tender and full of love. The sun began to set. The crowd slowly dispersed. Folding chairs were stacked. The podium wheeled away, but Raymond stayed. He sat quietly on the bench as long shadows stretched across the grass, the warmth of the day settling into a cooler hush. Lucky lay beside him, head resting gently on Raymond's leg, eyes closed, chest rising and falling in slow, even rhythm. It was the same park where they had once curled together on damp cardboard, trying to sleep through hunger and cold. Now they sat side by side, not as survivors, but as something more, symbols of what healing looks like when it walks on four legs and speaks without words. A photographer from the local paper crouched nearby and captured a final image. Raymond smiling down at Lucky, one hand stroking the soft fur behind his ear, the other resting gently on the engraved bench. The next morning, the story ran on the front page with the headline, "The Dog Who Delivered Hope to A broken man and a community. As dusk settled again and the park lights flickered to life, Raymond leaned down, his voice a low whisper in Lee's ear. "We made it, boy, and we shared it too." Lucky did not stir, but his tail thumped once against the grass, slow and steady, like a heartbeat remembering its purpose. And in that quiet moment, beneath a painted sky, the two who had once had nothing now had everything that mattered: love, memory, and a legacy of kindness that would outlive them both. And so, a man who had lost everything found hope in the most unexpected companion, a stray dog with quiet eyes and a steadfast heart. Their story was not just about luck or even about a winning ticket. It was about the kind of love that asks for nothing and gives everything. It was about loyalty, healing, and the quiet power of sharing what little you have with someone else who needs it just as much. From a torn sandwich beneath a bridge to a carved bench in the sun, Raymond and Lucky showed us that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest miracles. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe to Amazing Paws Stories, where we bring you true and emotional tales of the unbreakable bond between people and animals. Stories that heal, stories that stay with you, because sometimes all it takes is a paw print to find your way back home.